Hey everybody, welcome back, and I hope you've had a chance to watch my last video, my summary and review on Halo Edge of Dawn, because today I am following through on my promise to break down the final section of the book called Adjunct, Harbinger's Lament. This being a poem that reveals the history and origins of the Xalanan species, and by extension, the Endless. Now, I must emphasize again that this section of the novel was a poem, and that the text is not super clear on where exactly the Endless come from, or when exactly they came into being. It's very vague, and I feel like some lines could be misinterpreted very easily. So that means that whatever conclusion I or others come to should be taken with a grain of salt until it is explicitly confirmed by Halo Studios, whether or not that would actually happen. And I'm not really saying that anybody is going to be wrong or that my take on things will be more correct. In fact, I'm probably going to be one of the only people that come to the conclusions that I do, but I just wanted to set expectations early. And while I am certainly not Deborah Wilson, I am going to start things off by reading the entire poem and then move into a breakdown of each line of text. But if you'd like to skip ahead to where I actually start the breakdown, check the timestamps in the video description. And of course, this video is literally nothing but spoilers, so please proceed with caution. But with that out of the way, let's dive right in. He hovered over the waters, a wisp of the lords of old. The bright horizon trembled in weight. Great wings and a flowing tail, pure life bound in celestial circulation, verdant gaze, prelude to breath. One of making, they of making, his nature from a pulse begat. He was, we are, he became, a radiant shower. Spores became shores, we sprang forth, vessels of eternal light, computational circulation, quantum blood, and neural bone, with a skeleton, a glow of home. Our world was a life beyond the before. From his light we were made, among all kinds we rose. Over the flow of twinning streams, as which past became was from is, we sought everlasting, we sought unity. We grew from dust, we grew as his, we are beloved as his. We grew anew, the children of Abaddon, seeking to last everlasting, to swim in the twinning streams, to be at one with the current. What was, what is, what will be. Each of us grew anew. We begat what became of us, familiars, propagation, echoes, each a kind of our own, to preserve, to cultivate, to build. We were as he is to us. Some we kept close, some we sent out, some remain among you. We stood by, but not by. Tides rose and the streams flowed, and the stars winked in and out. Life bloomed and its petals fell, defeat on repeat. Until one day, the children of death were set upon the cosmos, hubris and creation and gnashing of teeth, a cradled kind torn asunder and set loose upon those beside and those before. Hunters of his kin, crafters of his yoke, blind to us, but not bound to us. A new wave crashed upon this galaxy's shores, a twisted deluge once more seeking unity, but not like before, and not as we sought. Not to commune, but to command. It was like our Lord. It is not our Lord, but it seeks to be yours. Countless synchrons aligned like stars, a constellation brought a broken freedom in the shape of a ring. Its pervasive pulse cleaving in the wake of cleansing, rattled and ruptured our timeless tethers, our entangled essences dammed off from the eternal fount. A twisted tributary, both misery and sweetness, to our everlasting weeping and wails. We cast our plight upon the hunters. We weave our fate to those that follow, though we had come before. The first freed by the displaced, I search and cannot know like I should, cannot find my kind, my mind. Once I wielded the kinetic light of an aborted age, but now I can but scrape power off a scant surface, like wiping the dew from a vessel, full but closed. For once I feel the ticking clock. Reclamation, provocation, they do not understand, but they must provide an end, all the same. He like machine and her like mind, photon, neurons, alloy flesh to bind. If I could but show them the truth, what kings their kind were built to be, more than false echoes of a sundered scar. Cut off from the glow, I've lost my light, eternal whole, now finished fight. My last drops, an entangled plea, to return the why of me to we. But to no surprise, this is no surprise. We live all of it at once, to remember, to be, to become. I knew I was to die, but could not have lived differently. Would not. The flow we map within the glow is not an immutable current, but the overlap of cause and consequence. The universe is a box. We know its edges. We fill its space. Mine to be a story told, a herald of new and now and old. Last drops of light to sing their song. Tell them I am sorry it took so long. That last line right there is actually one of the last things that the Harbinger says right before her death. So this is essentially her final testament, one where she details their creation, how they explored the universe and upheld the mantle, the genocide of the precursors, the rise and fall of the flood, her kind's unrightful imprisonment by the Forerunners, and then the remorse or lament that she felt over a nearly 100,000-year-old misunderstanding that ultimately leads to her death and potentially a much greater dilemma in the future. And while we weren't really given a lot to work with in Halo Infinite's story, Halo Edge of Dawn reiterated that she had transmitted a message to somewhere on the ring. That message actually being this text. And like I said in my review and summary video, they have all but confirmed that she was speaking directly with Atriox, having given whoever received this message both the location and the same access key that resided in the Gayash held by combat medic Lucas Browning. And the reason that we know it was Atriox is because of that final cutscene where Atriox rests a device on a Forerunner plinth, and then it opens up to a large chamber filled with silexes. These, of course, being the ones that held the Xalanen, or the Endless. Now, everything I just talked about is really just a summary of what she said, but now it's time to actually go through line by line and really try to figure out what it is that she was trying to tell us. And I will warn you guys that this is going to be another long one, and I am definitely going to ramble as we go through my theories, so please bear with me. He hovered over the waters, a wisp of the lords of old, the bright horizon trembled in wait. Having already listened to or read the text, we know that this he that she is referring to is Abaddon, and already we can see that she's trying to depict that whoever this entity is, they're this almost ethereal being, and pay close attention to how she refers to this entity as a wisp of the lords of old, because your first thought would be, oh, she has to be referring to the precursors. But when she talks about its connection to them here in just a moment, the wording makes me wonder if it's actually more complex than that. Great wings and flowing tail, pure life bound in celestial circulation, verdant gaze, prelude to breath. She is simply trying to give us some more imagery, which, in all honesty, is a very good description of the only official picture that we have of Abaddon. This pure life bound by celestial circulation description, however, is a bit more interesting. Now, the Forerunners believed in something called living time, a philosophical concept that they derived from the teachings of the Mantle. This concept is more or less the belief that the universe is a living being that everything is bound to. Its connection to everything is an immutable component or constant of life that could be directly affected by the balance of the universe, determined by the amount of struggle, competition, and war, in contrast to life and growth. With that said, the long-standing idea is that Abaddon is a precursor construct, more specifically worded, a creation of the precursors. However, I think we've already reached a point where my interpretation is going to start to differ from others because I think that we've got Abaddon all wrong, as I believe that this being of pure life has a celestial connection to a certain type of all-encompassing life force. But let's continue. One of making, they of making, his nature from a pulse begat. Or begot. I might have said it incorrectly the first time, but to me, this is simply telling us about Abaddon's role in the creation of the Xalanen. Although it could potentially refer to his own origin, as in he was created by a pulse, but I actually lean more towards this saying that his nature was begat or enacted through a pulse, having carried out the act of creation to form new life forms, much like we saw him do in the novel Halo Fractures when he manifested organic recreations of Promethean crawlers and aggressor sentinels. I'll note too that we are seeing the use of non-gendered pronouns mixed with a masculine one. One, they, he. At first, I thought maybe the use of they was to be received as a plural, as in, Abaddon represented multiple entities, but if you think about the fact that she is referring to a godlike creator who is described as having a face that is not male or female, Abaddon doesn't necessarily have a specific gender, just as God, traditionally in Protestant and Catholic texts, was not depicted as a physical being, but instead a spirit-like entity. Yet he was still referred to in the masculine, he, him, his, per the imagery that he is the Holy Father, yada yada yada. This is not a religious thing, I'm just talking about the use of literary devices. But hey, given the fact that the Harbinger comes from an alien species who is described as having no two individuals who look the same, I'm going to say there's clearly some wiggle room on trying to unwrap how exactly they use pronouns in their language. But moving on. He was, we are, he became. A radiant shower. Spores became shores. We sprang forth. I think that by using the relation of we to this godlike being, they are saying that Abaddon imparted itself into them in some way, bestowing within them its very essence, or in some semblance, a connection to the thing that it draws its own life force from. But either way, Abaddon created a radiant shower, or the pulse we talked about a second ago, which turned spores into shores of life, with the Xalanen springing forth. This cements that yes, Abaddon created new life forms, the Xalanen, but the use of the word spores here has a lot of people thinking this is definitive proof that connects the Xalanen to the precursors, who, to escape the Forerunners' genocide of their species in ancient times, had turned themselves into a dust-like substance. This dust, as many people are saying, is the spores that the Harbinger is referring to. And while I don't actually agree with this conclusion, I think they're pretty close. Instead, I believe that the Xalanen were not made out of the remains of the precursors, but instead are precursors, or at the very least, are synonymous with those godlike beings that have been described to us in the lore. But for this to be possible, we have to go a bit deeper than just the idea that the two races are the same. We have to look at the origins of Abaddon itself. Now, in the 2022 edition of the Halo Encyclopedia, the entry on Abaddon states that little is known about the origins of the intelligence called Abaddon. Appearing in a form conventionally assumed to be a precursor ancilla, Abaddon manifested as the protector of the domain, charged with overseeing the arcane knowledge network to unclear ends. In truth, the only thing that we know about the domain is that it was long believed by the Forerunners to be a creation of the precursors. But in Halo Epitaph, just set before the events of Halo Infinite, it was said that the realm may actually predate them. And to reinforce that idea, it is said that the realm holds 100 billion years of information, which really doesn't make sense when you consider that the Halo universe as we know it is only 13.7 billion years old. How exactly that's measured is not clear, like if it cumulatively represents 100 billion years of information, like it would take that much time to process it, or if it is literal and relative to time that has passed. If the latter, that means the domain has existed long before the birth of our universe, and if the domain is somehow tied to living time, perhaps that may mean it is the living memory of our universe itself, and whatever universe or universes which came before. More in relation to our story though, it means that if Abaddon is tied to its protection, and it was not created by the precursors, Abaddon may have been around long before the precursors even took shape. He may have even been their creator too. I'm definitely not done talking about the precursors, the domain, and living time, but I've spent long enough on this stanza already, so let's continue. Vessels of eternal light, computational circulation, quantum blood and neural bone, with a skeleton aglow of home. This is where my rambling really starts to come together, as here she claims that the endless are vessels for an eternal light, hinting that perhaps the endless have some sort of direct connection to living time, that essence I suggested that Abaddon may have housed within them. Computational circulation, however, might suggest that they may be pseudo-organic life forms, and definitely the case as she says they have quantum blood, neural bones, and skeletons aglow of home. With the use of the word vessel and saying that their skeletons are aglow of home, that makes me wonder if their physical forms are almost more of a literal vessel that their soul inhabits, as though they were ethereal beings themselves who were pulled from some other realm and given bodies to inhabit. The next line kind of builds on this. Our world was life beyond the before. From his light we were made, among all kinds we rose. By saying their world was a life beyond the before, perhaps they understand where it is exactly that they came from. Maybe they were even told about it by Abaddon. And again, by saying that they were made from his light, she is acknowledging Abaddon being the manifestation of the living universe itself, or possessing something of that nature. And when it comes to among all kinds we rose, we actually saw the Grand Edict say something like this about them during the trial of the Zalanin, having said, no two of the delegation in the silent auditorium looked the same. But again, this could be another hint that the precursors and the Zalanin are one and the same, or are at least connected. Over the flow of the twinning streams, as which past became was from is, we sought everlasting, we sought unity. The flow of twinning streams, I think, is a metaphor for the universe expanding and growing, then getting into the more confusing which past and paired with the became was from is. That's probably just a fancy way of saying now became then, which inevitably became the past. Then by saying that they sought everlasting and unity, it would seem that they strove to achieve some sort of permanence in this world while doing so in a collaborative way, whether amongst themselves or as a collective with potentially others like them. And by that again I mean that the Zalanin may have been working alongside other creations of Abaddon. Perhaps the group of beings we know as the precursors may be just a separate population or group created around the same time. We grew from dust, we grew as his, were beloved as his. We grew anew, the children of Abaddon. By saying that they grew from dust, I see this line as another familiar metaphor that we've seen in religion, being this idea that humans were built from earth or earthly materials. And by stating, or more so proclaiming, that they grew as his, and that they are beloved as his, we can discern that the Endless may have truly felt as though Abaddon was their god. Seeking to last everlasting, to swim in the twinning streams, to be at one with the current. I think as a whole, this stanza is just building on what I said earlier, that they wish to exist in this realm and be at one with the forces of it, ultimately wanting to just live and experience life. And this is actually in line with something that the Zalanin said themselves, having described their species as explorers, observers, and scholars who merely wish to exist. What was, what is, what will be. This builds on that last stanza again, showing that they just want to experience and exist, the was, is, and will be representing their anticipation to exist well into the future and watch as the galaxy grows. Each of us grew anew. We begat what became of us, familiars, propagation, echoes. As has been said numerous times, they grew from nothing, but in some way grew anew. And I have seen some people use this quote as part of their theories that they were grown from the remains of the precursors, but if we're sticking with my line of thinking, I think this is just another nod at the possibility that they were just given physical bodies in our universe to exist in, but did exist in some other ethereal realm before being brought here. And we begat what became of us, I think refers to how they themselves were created and then went on to create other races themselves. And we know that's actually exactly what they did, because when she says familiars, she's talking about the Gaskira, who in the novel were revealed to be a species that they had made as servant tools, kind of like how the Forerunners had created the Hurugok. And then again with propagation, echoes, I imagine this is the introduction of how they and the precursors had made other species, who would then carry on the process until they themselves were nothing but a distant memory. Therefore stating that perhaps the Zalanin may have already been engaged with the mantle of responsibility, the protection and curation of life. Each a kind of our own, to preserve, to cultivate, to build, we were as he is to us. Again, they were all unique in their forms, or perhaps this is referring to the subsequent creations that came before or after them, whether by Abaddon's doing or theirs, and he then went on to task them to preserve, cultivate, to build. The key tenets of the mantle of responsibility, and therefore, by creating more life, they were, as he was to them, creators, maybe even considered gods in their own right, which may have been another clue that they may be the same as the precursors. Some we kept close, some we sent out, some remain among you. Now, if we're saying that they are in fact the precursors, this bit is explainable with what we've already sort of known about them. We know that they were travelers who went through different star systems and seeded them with intelligent life. At some point, over 15 million years ago, they entered the Milky Way galaxy. These two lines, some we kept close, some we sent out, must be referring to how some remained in their home system, but some made a pilgrimage to other galaxies, like ours. which also implies that there are precursors or populations of the endless and other intelligent species that might fit into this precursor category who exist beyond our galaxy. And then with this line, "Some remain among you," she is finally addressing the listener, which is most likely Atriox, as we have speculated. And the idea of precursors still being among us is not a super new concept, as this has already happened in 2 separate novels, Halo Point of Light, where it's revealed that the librarian had discovered precursor seeds in ancient times, and in Halo Outcasts, where we find out that there are precursor fugitives who had escaped to the planet of Netherop and remained there ever since. But again, if she is referring to the precursors, by using "we," she is really helping my theory that they are one and the same. "We stood by, but not by. Tides rose and streams flowed, and the stars winked in and out. Life bloomed and its petals fell, defeat on repeat." Here she is telling us her kind has been around a very long time. And as she mentions, standing by as tides rose and the streams flowed, she's talking about how life must have been flourishing throughout the universe for some time. So as life grew and died back, there would be this inescapable defeat on repeat, which is not really a bad thing, as this implies that there was a healthy cycle and a balance for the universe. That is, until one day the children of death were set upon the cosmos, hubris in creation and gnashing of teeth, a cradled kind torn asunder and set loose upon those beside and those before. Now we've entered some familiar territory, with these children of death being the very early forerunners who we know rose up against the precursors, with their hubris or pride and overconfidence eventually causing them to lash out and turn against their creators. And from what we've been told by the Primordial, one of the precursors, this was because ancient humanity was allegedly going to be passed the mantle of responsibility over the Forerunners. Or at least that's one story, as there are also conflicting accounts that say the Forerunners believed that their kind was going to be exterminated. Either could be true, or both could be. Either way, they still lashed out. This bit with a cradled kind almost makes me think that maybe some felt like the Forerunners were coddled or knowingly allowed to get to that point, with her saying this to show that there is clearly still some resentment, obviously, but also to emphasize how big of an act of betrayal it really was, as they were given life only to take it from their creators. And then of course, how they were set loose upon those beside and before is referring to their aggressive attitude with not just the precursors, but also the other intelligent species of the galaxy as well. Hunters of his kin, crafters of his yoke, blind to us, but not bound to us. By saying his kin, she is of course referring to Abaddon's connection to the precursors and how much like the Xalanin, they were his children. And by saying crafters of his yoke, she might be talking about how at some point following the genocide, or maybe during it, we don't actually really know when, Abaddon was captured and imprisoned in the heart of the Forerunner capital, Maithrillian. And the blind to us but not bound by us bit must be stating that she witnessed all of the precursor Forerunner war transpire, with the Forerunners completely ignorant to the fact that more, like the precursors, existed in some far-off galaxy, and would be forced to still watch over these violent and unforgivable creatures. A new wave crashed upon the galaxy's shores, a twisted deluge once more seeking unity, but not like before, and not as we sought. This new wave, which crashed upon the galaxy's shores, is without a doubt meant to represent the emergence of the Flood. And here she makes a big delineation from what the Flood represented compared to what the Xalanin or precursors did. She claims that this twisted deluge once more seeked unity, but not as they sought it. This is because whereas they and the other creators sought to nurture and help life grow, the Flood wanted to consume all life and reshape it to meet its goals. Not to commune, but to command. It was like our Lord, it is not our Lord, but it seeks to be yours. Those goals which I mentioned are not to commune with the other species of the galaxy, but to take command of them. And the Flood are confusing in that way, because their goals of consuming and reforming life would mean the complete extinction of all life, which, like I said in the past line, is a huge difference from the teachings of the Mantle. And then by saying it was like our Lord, it is not our Lord. That's to say that whatever the collective Flood mind manifested into was not to be considered the same as Abaddon. And of course, it seeks to be yours is just to say that it wants to bring all life under its umbrella, specifically said as a warning to the listener. Countless synchrons aligned like stars, a constellation brought a broken freedom in the shape of a ring. I have to be honest here, I think the word synchrons is only relevant to Halo, with synchrons being described as instrumental moments in time that connect great forces and personalities together that are rarely felt, but are inevitable and unpredictable. The emergence of the Flood and the ensuing wars, the Human Forerunner War, the Forerunner Flood War, being the accumulation of countless billions or trillions of beings all experiencing these synchrons in one way or another. So by saying countless synchrons, that might be what she was referring to. And by saying constellation, that's her way of saying that the use of the Halo Array to eradicate the Flood was not really a victory, but rather a broken freedom which had come in the shape of a ring, as they were only free from the Flood at the cost of all intelligent life in the galaxy. Its pervasive pulse cleaving in the wake of cleansing, rattled and ruptured our timeless tethers, our entangled essences dammed off from the eternal fount. From various entries, we know that the Halo Array's halo effect is known to damage anything that is tied to neural physics, the theoretical science by which all precursor technology and artifacts functioned. This science essentially worked because the precursors were able to harness the metaphysical universal force, which was directly tied to the living universe itself. The domain is a realm which is believed to be directly tied to the science as well, so this rattling and rupturing must be a reference to how it was severely damaged when the Halo Array pulse cleansed the galaxy. The connections or timeless tethers that they had with it were also damaged, it would seem, with their essences now unable to connect to their eternal fount. And they were not alone in this, as we know the Forerunners were also cut off from the domain for a time. Hey everybody, Editor Wes here. I got too tired and I had to stop recording, so things might sound just a little bit different. My tone or inflection might change, but I just wanted to give you a heads up as to why I might sound a little different. Okay, thanks, bye. A twisted tributary, both misery and sweetness, to our everlasting weeping and wails. I found this section to just build off that sense of dread and sadness on how these timeless beings were somehow cut off from their repository and their life force. We cast our plight upon the hunters, we weave our fate to those that follow, though we had come before. By casting their plight upon the hunters, I can only assume that they mean they somehow refuse to interfere with the fallout. And by weaving their fate to those who follow, they fully accept whatever would come next, allowing the survivors to determine the future of the universe. Though we had come before, almost seeming to build on the resentment that comes from how they had been there since the beginning, building a flourishing universe, only to have it all ruined by the ones who came after them. I'm going to be honest, I'm not really sure if anything she has said yet is the mention of the imprisonment of the Xalanin by the Forerunners, but I almost wonder if by saying, "We cast our plight upon the hunters," this is referring to that moment when they lost any semblance of controlling the situation. The first freed by the displaced. I search and cannot know like I should, cannot find my kind, my mind. So, like I said just a moment ago, I'm not really sure if there was already a line that was supposed to represent when the Endless were imprisoned by the Forerunners, but this line, the first freed, is the mention of how she, the Harbinger, was the first of the Endless to be released from her Silex by the displaced, who we know are the Banished. And by saying she cannot know like I should and cannot find her kind or her mind, I think that she's saying she is alone and is still saying that she's cut off from this domain or the glow or whatever force, which the Xalanin must have had some natural ability to connect to without the need for a lithos or some sort of advanced technology. So even now, 100,000 years later, they still may be feeling the effects of the firing of the Halo Array. Once I wielded the kinetic light of an aborted age, but now I can but scrape power off a scant surface, like wiping the dew from a vessel, full but closed. This is where I start to think that she is almost scared at how powerless she feels, which is probably why she aligned herself in the Gaskira with the Banished. But by saying she wielded the kinetic light of an aborted age, is she simply lamenting on this wonderful time before, or is she literally saying that she used to have some sort of advanced power? Kind of like that light that enveloped her when we were fighting her in the Silent Auditorium. But ever since the firing of the Halo Ray and the time spent away from the domain, she is now barely able to pull enough power together to do the simplest of tasks, or at least that's what this sounds like. And by saying full but closed, she may be referring to how she can still feel that the domain is there, but she cannot access it, which, as we know, was actually sealed during the events of Halo Epitaph by the essences of the ancient humans, Forerunners, and the Ur-Didact. For once, I feel the ticking clock. Reclamation, provocation, they do not understand, but they must provide an end all the same. By saying she feels the ticking clock, she is either saying that she is no longer physically immortal as a result of being cut off from the domain, or she is saying that she is preparing herself for the inevitable battle with the Master Chief, which she fears may result in her death. Reclamation provocation is interesting though, because she may be referring to how she begrudgingly wants to take control of the ring. For what purpose though, it's unclear. But from the game, we know she is trying to initiate its reformation spires so that it can heal. Maybe she wanted to repair it so that it would be capable of slip-space travel, maybe she wanted to use it as a weapon, or maybe there was some other role that it could provide. Either way, she feels like no matter what she does, it wouldn't make sense to her perceived allies or her enemies. And I mention allies there because she says they must provide an end all the same, which may be referring to her knowing that even though the Banished do not understand or really like her or know what it is that they're helping her with, they have to help her because Atriox and by extension Escharum made a commitment to do so. He like machine and her like mind, photon neurons alloy flesh to bind. In these lines, she is directly referring to the Master Chief, who has on many occasions been seen as an unwavering machine, and Joyeuse, who is essentially the mind of their team. Photon neurons being her brain, and the alloy flesh being the Master Chief's Mjolnir armor or his augmented body, which allow the two to work in harmony. If I could but show them the truth, what kings their kind were built to be, more than false echoes of a sundered scar. This truth that she wishes she could show them is that their understanding of the Forerunners and how the humans were built up to be the rightful heirs of the mantle is all wrong. Because, in fact, the Forerunners weren't even given the mantle in the first place, and if it was going to be left in the hands of anyone, she believes it would have been the Endless. Either way, I think it's really ironic that she says it like this because she's acting like she wasn't even given a chance to explain herself, and if you remember, she actually said, "I am not your enemy" as well, but then proceeded to lock down his armor, got right up in his face, and then made mention of, but did not explain, what these Forerunner lies were. So you can definitely understand why the Chief responded in a defensive way, and she didn't do herself any favors when she then proceeded to throw him at a freaking boulder. But back to the text, she says more than false echoes of a sundered scar, almost implying that she thinks that modern humanity is really nothing more than survivors, unworthy of even taking the mantle in the first place. Cut off from the glow, I've lost my light, eternal whole, now finished fight. Now here she refers to this place that she has been disconnected and cut off from as the glow. Initially I thought this was just a different name or like a metaphor for the domain, but in Halo Cryptum, the glow was actually a term used to describe a realm outside the universe, which was composed entirely of photons or light. So outside of their connection to the domain, she may be revealing that their essence actually comes from that realm, the glow, being beings made of light, which she says has now been lost, meaning they lack substantial life force. And by saying eternal whole, now finished fight, she is saying that her endless nature is now finished, perhaps because of this fight against the Master Chief. My last drops, an entangled plea to return the why of me to we. Here she is, as the title suggests, lamenting the isolation of being the only member of the Endless who is free, no longer feeling a purpose or knowing that even with her plea, she will be unable to return to the why of me to we or rejoin her people. But to no surprise, this is no surprise. We live all of it at once, to remember, to be, to become. I think this stanza here is explained a little bit better when you look at it in conjunction with the next one. I knew I was to die, but could not have lived differently, would not. I think that what she's getting at in these two stanzas is that she's not just metaphorically saying that she sees her future, but may have actually seen the future at some point, having known her own fate before it even happened. And while a totally different topic, this is a trait that the domain is known to have, holding not just the memories of the past, but also the future or potential future possibilities, which is again sort of returning to the idea of synchrons, and maybe that's what the Harbinger is saying. She could feel that there was a synchron present, or maybe it's quite literal. She was just aware that the Master Chief was en route to the Silent Auditorium, and just assumed that she might not survive. The flow we map within the glow is not an immutable current, but the overlap of cause and consequence. Here again, she uses the term the glow, which may be the same thing as saying the living universe. And honestly, I don't know how many times I've said that in this video, but we're almost at the end here, so please bear with me. But yes, she mentions how we, presumably everyone in the galaxy, map a flow within the glow. She's maybe talking about, again, how we all play a part in living time itself, with all of our fates tied to some overarching universal one. But we, as individuals, are not an immutable current, but the product of cause and consequence. Maybe meaning that every being is important in their own way, but replaceable or an eventuality. Like if you weren't you, perhaps someone else would have been born to fill that role that you do in the universe. The universe is a box. We know its edges, we fill its space. Now, if you were to say that the universe is a box is a metaphor for it being a tangible space that things exist within, that's one thing. But she also goes on to say we know its edges, which that almost implies that despite our real-world understanding that the universe is an infinitely expanding realm, the endless may actually know where the boundaries or edges of this universe are, quite literally meaning that they know there are physical borders of physical reality, with what lies beyond, below, or in between being the glow, the domain, and the other dimensions that have been studied by the Forerunners in the past or whatever. Either way, the reality we know and the space we inhabit is what we fill. But I think she is saying that the endless know what lies beyond. Mine to be a story told, a herald of new and now and old, last drops of light to sing their song. Here she more or less has accepted her own fate in hopes that Atriox will pass along this message to others so that they know what it is exactly that she gave her life to reveal. And of course, the final thing that she says here in the text is also one of the last things that she says after her defeat by the Master Chief, which is, "Tell them I am sorry it took so long." Alright, so for everyone who stuck with me through the rambling and the long-winded breakdown, I just first need to say thank you. There are a lot of very complex topics weaved into this poem, and a lot of them are very poorly understood, but also areas that I don't have a lot of knowledge on. So if you have any clarifications or wanted to help me better prove my theory, be sure to let me know down in the comments. But now I want to cleanly lay out what it is that I pulled from Adjunct, Harbinger's Lament. I believe that this text told us that the Endless or the Xalanen were created by Abaddon, formed from the basis materials, not to be confused with the precursor remains. I believe that this happened in very, very ancient history, in a far-off place, long before the precursor remains were even in the picture. And I believe that these beings that we know as the precursors are actually related to the Xalanen, maybe being members of the same species, or part of some collective group who Abaddon gave life to. This is why they share many physical descriptors, and just like the Xalanen, were all known to look different from one another in some way. And if that were the case, that would mean that Abaddon is not actually a precursor AI, much like it has long been believed, but instead a manifestation of living time or the living universe itself. We also learned that their unique biology allowed them to directly harness the power of a mysterious realm known as the Glow, which may be directly tied to living time and the domain, with the Glow being the life force of the universe and the domain essentially the universe's memories. After their creation, the Endless did as Abaddon had done for them. They created other intelligent life and traveled across the cosmos, helping life grow and creating the concept that we know as the Mantle of Responsibility. The Gaskira are one such example of the Xalanen's work. And while there were some of the Endless who did leave their home system, others stayed behind, and those who did not enter the Milky Way galaxy watched as the Forerunners rose to power and lashed out against the Precursors and other races, watched as the Flood emerged and took over the galaxy, and watched as the Halo array destroyed all of the survivors. The Harbinger then told us that the damage done by the Halos extended to their abilities to access the domain and in turn the Glow, hindering them and making them vulnerable. As we know, the Endless then entered the Milky Way galaxy at some point after the Halos were fired, and were then imprisoned by the Forerunners, with only the Harbinger being released after 100,000 years. She would then lament on the fact that she would never again see her people, and told us that the Forerunners lied about humanity's inheritance of the mantle, with the truth being that it actually belongs to the Endless, as it was never meant to be passed along. And while I could be entirely wrong in the end, I really think that this poem was meant to shake up everything that we know about the Halo universe's past, present, and future. And when you think back to how Despondent Pyre and Cortana discussed how the Endless were somehow worse than the Flood, I think that this was a nod to the unknowns that come with them and the dangers that that could pose. And if you ask me, I think that if the Harbinger had not died, she would have finished repairs on Zeta Halo, rescued the Endless prisoners, and used the ring to find a Lithos or some other method to return them to the Domain or the Glow. Or maybe, and this is really speculative, I wonder if the endgame for the Halo universe is actually a total reset. The complete extermination of all of the Flood and all other intelligent species that still pose a further threat to the universe. They would possibly do this through the collapse of our physical universe, which, as the Age of the Domain may suggest, is not the first time that this sort of thing may have actually happened. Perhaps our universe is the 5th, the 7th, or the 10th iteration, all having been destroyed and remade in an effort to feed the living universe's hunger for experience and knowledge. And that's a little bit more sinister, but maybe the Endless will actually help us achieve galactic peace and end the Flood once and for all. But hey, who knows? That's a topic for another day. Now, if you haven't already, please be sure to like the video and subscribe for future Halo content. This video took a lot of time to put together, took a lot out of me, and every interaction helps with getting this kind of video in front of new people. And I'll say too, because of all of your guys' support, I am entering into the 2026 year having just hit 15,000 subscribers. So guys, a huge thank you to everybody who has been around for the ride and to everyone who is just joining in. But that is it for today. So I will see you in the next video.